So in the last BBC, I left off with the internal courtroom, and I'm going to continue with this book, which is just an amazing, actually, workbook for life. It really is amazing. It's only 163 pages long, I think. 169 pages long, and actually, I just counted. There are 67 techniques for working with anger in this book. So if we could even find one and use one of the 67, I think that'd be just amazing. So there's a great choice here, and techniques for almost every situation you can think of. So I'm going to review a point that I mentioned last time that is really critical in my mind, and something that I have to keep reminding myself. And Venerable Children writes this: whether or not another person wishes us ill does not matter. We still have a choice whether or not to be offended. There's the clincher right there. We have a choice. Now, what she doesn't say is, oh, you're a failure if you feel something when someone says something to you or does something to you. Of course we're going to feel something. I'm going to feel something, and it might be just like an explosion inside. But I do have a choice as to what to do with that explosion inside, or even it's just a mild irritation. And this is where we work through these scenarios on the cushion, so that when these things happen, and they're going to happen for the rest of our life, we have some tools to deal with these things. So we have a choice on whether or not we feel offended. The less we are attached, for example, Venerable Children says, to praise and reputation, the less miffed we will become, because our mind will not interpret situations as personal assaults. So I think it's really good for us to go back and review the 8 worldly concerns, because quite often the 8 worldly concerns are running when we get triggered, when our button gets pushed and there's the blaring siren. And so, of course, they are attachment to material things and money, and feeling aversion when we don't get them, feeling attachment to praise and having aversion to blame, having attachment to having a really good reputation, and aversion to anything that harms our reputation, and attachment to sense pleasures, and aversion to not getting a particular sense pleasure, or all of them. So that's a very good place to start looking when we start to sort of uncover what's underneath the button. So we're going to look at this section that she calls Close the Internal Courtroom. And this is what Venerable Children has to say about this. When we feel someone has wronged us, we may ruminate on it for hours, days, weeks, decades. I'm willing to guess maybe even lifetimes. Going over and over the situation again and again. This is great use of meditation time. I'm joking about that. And inside of us is the prosecutor, the judge, the jury. And of course, these people are all in agreement that it's the other person who's wrong, and of course, we're right. And this internal courtroom is happy to work overtime. It will go on hour after hour, trying and prosecuting the person. This internal dialogue stops only when we sleep, and I'm wondering about that. I think you'd have dreams about it. And then resumes early the next morning. In addition to this internal courtroom, all of our friends, at least the people we're calling friends that day, will agree that that person is wrong and has overstepped the boundaries and has harmed us. And despite all the sympathy that we might garner from our friends, we're still miserable, right? Why? Because, here's another line to write down, put it on your mirror. Being right has nothing to do with being happy. And Zopa, when she was living here, she told us a time that she and her partner at the time went for counseling. And they were having some struggles, as all partnerships do. And the therapist at the time asked them both, do you want to be right, or do you want to be close? Now that is a really good thing to think about. Because sometimes, we all turn into last word Lucy or last word Larry. And we all want to have that shot in there, because we're right. And we know it's going to push buttons, because our buttons have been pushed. So just, think about that. Do you want to be right, or do you want to be close? Because being right, big deal, right? So you're out in the playground all by yourself, because you're right. Nobody wants to play with you. This chapter, this is still chapter 9. Venerable goes on to talk about rules of the universe. There's a great chapter. There's not time in this talk to go into that. So you can go and read that. And then further on in the chapter, Venerable gets back to this thing about our buttons and digging underneath. And she says, it's one thing to become aware of our buttons. It's quite another thing to see what's underneath the button. And there's where the work is in our meditation. She says, discover the real issue, because self-centeredness interprets events in relationship to me. We not only become upset at others' comments, but we exaggerate their import. So in the book, she gives this fabulous example of this. It's the peanut butter story. So I'd like you to read that. It's really good. But I have another story that a friend told me years ago, and it's very similar to the peanut butter story. So don't think that the peanut butter story is unique in this book. It's just widespread. So I'll just summarize this story quickly. My friend and her partner had an agreement, and they were raising kids at the time, and they were both working full-time, that they would all have dinner at the same time every night at 6 o'clock. This was the agreement. They took turns cooking, too. Well, her partner could absolutely never show up on time at 6 o'clock. Never. And they knew this about each other, but every time he came in late, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour and a half, of course, her buttons were pushed. So this one night, having worked all day, you've got kids, you're wanting to connect because then, after dinner, everyone sort of disperses again. You're driving them here and there and meetings and things. She lost it, and she started saying the lines in this book, like, it's obvious you can't ever make it here on time. It's obvious you don't love me anymore. You don't respect me. You don't respect our family. You always do this. You never do that. 2 words that are fighting words here. Always and never. Those are really dangerous words. And the whole conversation, she ended it with, I think we need to get a divorce. And her partner was just like, I'm 10 minutes late and we have to get a divorce? It's like, and then she started listing all the other things, right? You pull out, here, Venerable Children lists it beautifully. Here it is. So, when our buttons are pushed, we can make one event or phase or phrase the symbol of an entire relationship. Our minds build on a small occurrence, making it into a huge one that we're certain is true. Upset, our mind jumps from one conclusion to another with astounding speed. In addition, here's the part I love, we draw on our arsenal of stored painful experiences to lob onto the other person. We've collected this arsenal over time, accumulating all the small things our friend has done that we don't like. Rather than dropping them or clearing them up as they occur, we've stored them in our memory to use as ammunition the next time a fight occurs. Then we shell the other person with past situations that likely he or she doesn't remember at all. That language is just so beautiful. It sums up what we do. We just lump everything together, lob the bomb, kaboom. How can we avoid this, she says. First of all, by being aware of our feelings, we'll notice anger when it's small and apply the antidotes to settle our mind. Okay, there's 67 ways of doing it in this book. Then, depending on the situation, we may decide to explore the issue with the other person. In this way, we avoid stockpiling hurtful experiences that could build up resentment and lead to an explosion. Second, by being aware of our feelings, we will learn to identify the real issue in the conflict instead of being led astray by false buttons. In this case that I just related, it was the person showing up late. That's a false button. We can ask ourselves whether we are upset by the ostensible issue, like being late, is that really it? Or whether we're really upset by the underlying issue. Maybe there's some fear going on that we're drifting away from the partner that we care about. So in this way, we will know whether we need to discuss the problem at hand or go and look at something deeper, like our mutual respect and concern for each other. Then we can discuss the situation, being sure to listen carefully and to express ourselves in ways the other person can understand. So in closing, there are 2 appendices in this book. Appendix 1 is fabulous because it talks about conflict styles. And there's 5 of them. I'm just going to read them out just to whet your appetite so you go out and get the book today. So Venerable Chögyam says this: researchers delineated 5 categories of conflict style: avoidance, control, accommodation, compromise, and collaboration. So she says, while many people tend to use one conflict style more than others, familiarity with all of these give us versatility, because depending on the specific situation, one style may be more effective than another. And then from a Buddhist perspective, in every conflict situation, we've got to check our motivation to see that it is pure. Thus, when in a conflict, we should examine 2 variables. Number 1, our motivation, and number 2, the practical effectiveness of various conflict styles for that situation. Conflict styles deal with external behavior. Each style can be done with either a good motivation or a bad motivation. In addition, depending on the situation, one style may be more effective than another for resolving a situation. However, and here's another clincher here, when anger clouds our mind, we lack the mental clarity to choose a conflict style appropriate for the situation. Instead, we tend to react in the same habitual way in all situations. So you might want to look at this and figure out what is your knee-jerk conflict style, and look at the other 4 and see which ones, well, let's get familiar with all of them so that when things come up, we've just got this whole, palette of techniques to draw on rather than just the old, boom, there it is, this is how I'm going to react. It's a fabulous book. Have a wonderful festive season. Just think, if we can reduce our buttons, it doesn't matter who we're with or where we are, it's not going to be a problem. We can still be close. Maybe we'll be right, but who cares?